It is an enormous pleasure and a huge privilege this morning to welcome you, Rabbi Dr. Lawrence Hoffman, to the LJS, Professor Emeritus at the New York campus of the Hebrew Union College, Jewish Institute of Religion. From the moment I entered Leo Baeck College, a few years ago now, Rabbi Hoffman's scholarship and research was consistently commended, particularly on the subject of liturgy, ritual and worship, spirituality and theology. And as the progressive movements began to evaluate the direction that they were taking and should take, Rabbi Hoffman was again the guide on synagogue transformation and leadership. He has written and edited 45 books to date, including My People's Prayer Book, now a 10-volume edition of the Siddur with modern commentaries. There is much, much more to tell of his achievements and awards, but that would be to take up the time that I would like to give to you, Rabbi Hoffman, to speak to us this morning on the spirituality of the Torah, your life in miniature. We welcome you with the words of the psalmist, Baruch haba b'shem Adonai, birachnuchem mi beit Adonai. Blessed are you who come in the name of the Eternal One. We bless you from the house of the Eternal One.
To begin with, thank you, Rabbi Wright. What a lovely introduction. I'm honored and grateful to you for it. And I must say, it is a distinct honor to be here with you. Many years ago, long before I had any notion I would ever find my way here, this synagogue was recommended to me as the great institution that it is, a destination point, if you like. We think these days of destination weddings where you come together to be at the destination, and if there is a destination synagogue, this is it. So I entered it. We had a class this morning on the sacred, and I almost thought to myself, well, I won't bother teaching it because here you are. You already know it. I am surrounded by a sense of history, a sense of the depth of Jewish tradition, sense of the great rabbis who have and who now serve this congregation, and all it is that you represent just by being here. I'm grateful for your welcome beyond words. Thank you. We regularly have an understanding of whatever Sedra it is for that week. We meet on Shabbat to pray and to read from the Sedra and to learn what we can learn from that Sedra. But I often think to myself, to simply read the Sedra itself, which of course is what Jews do, we can lose track of the larger picture, the Torah as a whole. It would be as if you decided to read a mystery novel and every week you read 10 pages. It would be very hard to keep track of the entire story, especially since with the sermon and with the commentaries that are brought to mind by what the preacher has to say, you go deeper and deeper into the details. And you know the details of the details. But I wonder if we could pan out for just a moment and look at what the Torah as a whole is, because it is a whole. The Torah is seen as the Torah, not simply this book or that book, but those 5 books all the way from Genesis to Deuteronomy. What if we were to look at all of that? I think were we to do that, we would discover that the 5 books of Torah reflect not just those formative years of Israel's experience from the time of the founding of the world, as it were, with Adam and Eve, and certainly Abraham and Sarah, and all the way then to Moses and entering the Promised Land. But actually, it has within it a flow, which is the flow of a human life, any human life. And I think to myself, as we read the Torah and read the story with manifest content and the commentaries underneath it, it pays also to think of ourselves, our own lives. Where are we in Torah? Because each book of the Torah is a stage of our life, and to lead an entire life, should we be fortunate enough to do so, is to find our way moving with Torah from Genesis, the very beginning, like the beginning of our life, to Deuteronomy, the end, the beginning of old age, and looking ahead to what might come after that. So let's start with Genesis for a moment. Read yourself into that book and ask yourself, what's that about? Quite clearly, as we heard this morning in the reading and in the remarks by your rabbi, quite clearly, it's about struggle and strife. And it's about having children. It's about being born. And it begins with the difficulty of being born, not from your perspective of being born, but from the perspective of those who bear you. It's not so easy to conceive. It's not so easy to give birth and to be pregnant. And then we come into the world, not knowing any of that, we come into the world fully born. But we come into the world also as one of those two twins. And so the rest of the story of this first book is really about struggle between children. This is your life, my life writ large. I don't have to know your life. I can tell you, you are part of it. It's not easy to be a child. None of these children do very well, actually. Abraham's first child gets banished into the wilderness. And then he can barely have the second one, and in the very next chapter, he tries to kill him. As for the first two children, Cain and Abel, well, that didn't work out so well, did it? Sibling rivalry is writ large all the way through it. Rebecca and Leah, Jacob and Esau. And what about poor Joseph? Favorite son who gets sold into slavery. And there he makes a name for himself, but in a foreign land, as the prince of Egypt. And finally, he has a chance for revenge. Should he take revenge or not? He decides he wants to see his favorite brother. He makes Benjamin come. He negotiates with the other brothers, cat and mouse, for several chapters. But see how difficult it all is. But at the end, the last scene, is the scene of Father Jacob gathering his children around him. And what does he do? He gives them each a blessing. It sounds wonderful, right? Have you read the blessings? Some of them are very nice. Others, oh my goodness. It's the same with Isaac. When Isaac gathers Jacob and Esau together, my goodness. One brother who gets nothing, he says, "Father, have you no blessing for me?" One of the most painful things in the world, to look at your parents and say, "What about me? You have no blessing for me at all?" And then at the end, what blessing will you get? You know, that's true of each of us. We inherit something from our parents. The question is, what is it? Is it a blessing or something we just as soon do without? We carry baggage into our lives. That's the nature of things. And so you move forward to the second book, the book of Shemot, the book of Exodus. And this is the story now of graduating from childhood into adolescence and then as a young adult. Shemot, the names. It's a time when you will make a name for yourself. You're no longer just a kid. What will you make of yourself? What name will you carry into the world? How will you be known? By your deeds. What will you do? What do you stand for? The first step, of course, is to leave Egypt. I don't want to make too much of it. It's not exactly slavery to be a child. But on the other hand, your parents make you go here and there, talk to your neighboring teenager, and let them tell you what it's like. It's a time when you have to free yourself from your parents and you struggle against them, and you become independent. And there you are now, saved from slavery of childhood, or you're on your own. But what will you do? And if you are successful, you need two things. And the rest of this book of Exodus is about those two things. First of all, you develop a sense of responsibility. What will you stand for? And that's what Sinai is. Torah is the giving of responsibility to the Jewish people. And so, too, in your young adult years, you get a sense of what will you stand for? What are you responsible for? And then you need to settle down. No longer part of your parents' home. You build a home for yourself. The last half of the book is about building a home, the Mishkan, the tabernacle. And if you're wise, you realize that to build a home is not just to build stone and brick and mortar, it's to build a place where God will dwell. And that's what makes a home a home. It's a home where the sacred adheres, a place where love transpires, because the relationship between Israel and God is a relationship of love. And so, too, you build your home. Will God be there? Will there be love that will mark the relationships in the home? And if you succeed, you get out of that book well. You've learned responsibility. You have a sense of what your life should contain. And now you make your way into the world. And you get to the third book. The third book is called Vayikra. God calls. And indeed, each of us has a calling. That word isn't used very much anymore. We think of it very largely as a Christian word altogether. Do rabbis have a calling? Do the police officers have a calling? Doctors, lawyers, teachers, mothers, fathers? I think yes. To be alive in the world as a human is not just to follow our instincts, but to choose where we go, to make a difference in the world, to leave a mark on future generations. We are called to be somebody. And that's why we have eulogies at the end of our lives to say, what were we? What did we do with our lives? So yes, we are called. And hence the very central book of the Torah, the middle one, is called, God calls us. This is your calling. Now, if you've read the book of Leviticus, the central book, what you realize is it's an interesting book because nothing happens in it. I mean, the rest of the Torah is a story. Leviticus, they stop in the middle and say, okay, time for some rules. Because actually, most of our life is spent, it seems, Vayikra, in our calling. Where mostly we worry about the little rules. I don't mean the grand rules. I'm talking about the ordinary day-to-day rules, because you do not find a more ordinary day-to-day book than Leviticus. It's all about the sacred, of course, the Levites. It's really about the priests. But in a sense, we are all priests. We are a priestly people. And what do the priests do? One thing only. They sacrifice. And to be a mature human being is to know that we must sacrifice. You raise children, if you have children, it's a sacrifice for them. If you want to matter in the world, you better learn not to take, but to give. And think then of what this Leviticus is like, the sacrifices. Yeah, I call it a calling. You may say, oh, what a magnificent thing. But the calling is just to be alive, to be human. The book is about bodies getting sick and running down and calling the doctor, in those days the priest, and trying to decide what's wrong. And do we have to put you outside the camp, which is to say, do we decide that it's a pandemic, as we've just been through, and we must all then self-segregate? Please, segregate yourself. Or how bad is it? What if the whole house is filled with it? Do we have to fumigate the house? That's the calling. It's about our very bodies and how they work. It's about menstruation. It's about having children. I don't mean the glory of, oh my God, I have a child. I mean the kind of the reality of it. It's about what's pure and what's impure, what you should eat and what you shouldn't eat. It is life writ large. Mostly, I think of our lives as being lived in our calling in that central period of our life when we learn to sacrifice, to be humans fully, and to give to the rest of the world, to our family, to whoever we're raising, and in whatever our calling happens to be. We're teachers or lawyers or parents, just to do it right and have the sense of satisfaction at the end. And we graduate then from Leviticus knowing we've been called and somehow we've succeeded. Which takes you, of course, to the fourth book. Bamidbar, in the wilderness. Think of it as a midlife crisis. You know, you get to the point in your calling where you can pretty much do it with one hand tied behind your back. You discover you're not going to be advanced any farther. You'll never be the president of the firm. You won't be the principal of the school. You're going to do what you're doing. You do it pretty well, actually, but that's what you do. Moreover, if you are raising children, you get to the point where you know they don't want to be raised anymore. And when they say goodbye to you, though they still need you a little bit, but eventually they won't. And they move off on their own because they have their own lives to lead. And now you say, I've spent all this time raising my children. They don't need me? And I worked so hard to get ahead at work, and I'll never get ahead any farther? And if you're a doctor, it's one more throat to look at and say, well, yeah, you have a throat infection. Is that really why you became a doctor? Or it's your, 5,000th, it seems, will that you're executing as a lawyer. Or one more contract, or one more sale. And at this point, you tire of it all. But you're young still. I mean, you're at the height of your power. You can do it simply now. But now what? What's the point of it all, you wonder? Everybody goes through that. The Israelites traveled for 40 years in the wilderness. The good news is this doesn't last 40 years. But it sets in when you're about 40. And then there's the sense also that even your life isn't progressing any farther. I mean, you remember the days when you had your first, you don't remember it, they told you, when you had your first step, your first word, and they took pictures of you, and they show you the pictures. Your first birthday party. Your first everything in those days mattered so much. And then you remember as a teenager maybe, your first date, your first kiss, the first car you drove when you got your driver's license. And then you got into university and you thought, oh, look at me now. And everyone made a big deal about you. The thing about Bamidbar in the wilderness is nobody makes a big deal about anything anymore. Once in a while, the kids come home and they say, hey, Dad, it's your birthday. And you say, yeah, I guess it is. And they say, I got a good idea. Let's have a party. So they give you a party. They can't remember exactly how old you are. Well, one candle will do. And will they all show up? Maybe. Last year they didn't. This year, maybe. And you discover that, like the desert or the wilderness, every day is the same. You ever walk through a desert of sand? More and more sand. And when you finally think you're coming out of it, it's a mirage. The desert looms endlessly. And so this difficult period of coming to terms with who we are now as a post-calling adult can take some time. We are in the wilderness. And the good news is you can get out of that too. The Torah provides one more book. It's the book of Deuteronomy. Deuteronomy means second. So it's literally, in its English name, it's the second review of the law, of the Torah, of Israel's history. And so it's really Moses reliving his life and the life of Israel, which was his calling, because he led them. And that is what the final stage of our life is. It's a chance to relive what we've done, rethink what we thought, review what our life has been. We know we are coming to the end of it. I mean, the good news is it's a fifth of Torah. It's not just a tiny book. You get a long time to do it if you're fortunate. But you become aware of what it is now to be old. The world has moved somewhat beyond you, and you live somewhat in the past. But what you have and you never had before is wisdom. When you become aged, you develop a kind of wisdom that's come from your life. And indeed, you become a sage in your own way. And now, perhaps as a grandparent or a parental figure for others, people now discover you have something to say because you've lived through the other 4 books. And so what do? You do what Moses did. Moses reviews his life and he remembers the 10 Commandments. He recites them again, but he changes them a little. He's got a little more wisdom. He likes a different version of it. According to the Midrash, he goes from tent to tent to tent, saying goodbye. And indeed, at some point, your friends begin to die. At some point, those you love may die, and you learn how to say goodbye. And it's painful. But it's the other end of life from when you learn to say hello. And if you do it right, the wisdom you have tells you quite clearly that you will not make it to the promised land, whatever that is. You realize you really are mortal. And you can see that at some point you won't be here anymore. And that's what Moses realizes. And he comes to terms with it. Because at the end, he climbs the mountain, and from the heights that only a sage can see from, the heights of wisdom, being able to look out at time and space, he looks at the promised land that he dedicated his entire life to, and he won't get there. But he knows others will. He knows he's followed by people for whom he's been the teacher. In this case, Joshua, in particular, not even his own child, but someone he's taught. He's been a mentor to this man. Joshua will continue the journey. The journey continues, even though I, Moses says to himself, will not. And with that wisdom, he climbs the mountain in that final passage, prepared finally to take his leave on the world. And he's ready to die, which is what we all want to be when the time comes. And we want to die the way he did. According to the Midrash, he dies peacefully with a kiss from God, a life well led. We all go through these books. And perhaps as we read the Torah from beginning to end, we're in the first book now, we can look back on where we were, rethink what we've been through, and depending on where we are in our life's journey, we'll find ourselves in those books. We can continue looking back and look ahead. But in the end, we are Torah. The Torah is us. And we see ourselves in every single page and realize what a mystery life is. This blessing from God, just to be alive and to lead a life of calling, sometimes of confusion, and finally of wisdom and coming to peace with where we are in the grand flow of time. Wherever you are in Torah in your life, I wish you blessing upon blessing. Shabbat shalom.